It's the Blue Room. It is Blue Monday. I am Matt Jones. Joining me, as ever, on a Monday for the show is Dave Downey. And also joining us is Patrick Ridge. We are not going to talk too much about the game against Brighton on Saturday. Not because it stings, and not because I've not watched it yet. That has got nothing to do with it. We're going to talk about big news that broke today. Everton have got 4 points back from the appeal board, which means they are up to, as we sit here recording this now before Brentford play West Ham, the lofty heights of 15th in the Premier League table. Would you believe it? Just probably hear from the lads just quickly. Everton's statement. It said Everton confirm an appeal board has concluded that the points deduction imposed by an independent Premier League commission in November will be reduced from 10 points to 6 points with immediate effect. While the club is still digesting the appeal board's decision, we are satisfied our appeal has resulted in a reduction in the points sanction. There's a big statement on there. The report's about 60 pages long. I'm sure Patrick's already read it twice, as he tends to do with these things. But I mean, yeah, lads, we're going to quickly sort of go through it. I'm sure it's still sort of settling and we've got to digest a lot of it still. But I mean, how are you feeling about it, Dave? I'll come to you first. It's obviously good, isn't it? But like, I'm pleased, and it's nice to see us move away from the relegation zone a little bit. But it doesn't really feel like the end of something. This it feels like the start of something.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that taking the context of it is, for me, is quite difficult because I just want us to stay up. Given the points, given all this, and I'm sure Patrick will have a different view of this, given that he's very knowledgeable about this sort of thing and what's going on with the oncoming appeal and things like that. But given how tired this has made us all feel all the way through it since November, to have something given back to us, which effectively puts us in a much better position in terms of being able to stay in the Premier League. That's what I've tried to keep front and centre of when I've read all this, because that essentially is the goal, isn't it? Really. Well, that provides that this doesn't continue into a following season. Everton staying in the Premier League is the priority, regardless of what position it is, whether it's 17th, whether it's on the final day of the season. We know this has happened to us the previous 2 years. This one looked like it was going to be the ultimate kick in the bollocks that sent us down. Still might be, lest we forget here. But all I ultimately care about is Everton staying in the Premier League. So regardless of the amount of points we get back, I'll still be looking at West Ham playing Brentford, and we'll still need a few favours and things like that. It's as unfair as we've all spoken about. And again, Patrick has a lot more info on this than me, but it's getting 4 points back and putting us further away from the relegation zone. I see that as a win today for me.
Yeah, are you sort of similar thinking, Patrick? I suppose we haven't won a game since December. We've been battered pillar to post by stuff off the pitch. It's maybe one we should cling onto and celebrate a bit today, even if we all still feel absolutely knackered and drained by it all.
Yeah, I saw a journalist who I work with a bit who's based over in Germany, and he did post this is the most points Everton have got back, or most points Everton have won in a day since December the 16th. So we've probably got to be grateful for that, haven't we? I think, yeah, he's definitely positive. We can't be negative in it. It is, I think, because we all have that hope. It's like, oh, and you go through those stages of grief where you just try and rationalize it and try and go, oh, we'll get this back, we'll win them all back. Is that really, we probably all deep down were worried we wouldn't get any back. So, essentially we're 4 points better off than we were 12 o'clock today, aren't we? And we've got to be grateful for that. And what I don't think the report is necessarily, from what I've read, I haven't managed to read it all yet, but I've read most of it. It's not necessarily brilliant for Everton, but the kind of precedent that it sets does maybe give some hope that even if it just means that Forest are going to get more than Everton, that, there's a very good chance that if we can just get on maybe 2 or 3 wins in the next 6 games, let's say, and try and kind of put some distance between ourselves and the bottom 3, then come May, or the sometime in May when those appeals are heard, if there's going to be appeals against the decision, that Everton might actually be out of this. But I think on the pitch first, we've got to get our act together now. We can't be throwing away any more points from getting into good positions or just passing up winnable games like Palace at home. We've got to actually go and deliver on the pitch now, and then just hope that our lawyers, I guess, do the job in the second case as well.
Yeah, we haven't seen the last of Mr. Silk or whatever his nickname is, certainly. But in terms of the actual outcome itself, Dave, I think there were 9 arguments put forward by Everton. 7 of them were dismissed by the panel, and 2 of them were sort of held up. The one that sort of stands out, and I think is most important, and the club have mentioned it in the statement, is the appeal board decided to overturn the original commission's find, and the club failed to act in utmost good faith, and that feels like something that what the club have said to us in regards to the repeal in this case and the repeal in the next case. That feels like something that's going to be important, certainly going forward into the next one as well.
Yeah, I mean, it felt since the start that the club have been open and apparent about it. They've since this has all began, several years ago. The club have been open, and well, as we've heard, they've sort of developed a relationship with the Premier League that's been open as well, and they've been, for want of a better term, fine to show them the books and things like that. And then, obviously, whoever's done that at the club, they'll be giving them to them, almost begging for the fact that, oh, we've been honest with you, please don't come back at us, and don't make. We've cooperated like anything. I think with when you watch a police film or whatever like that, or if I help you out, don't give me as much of a sentence. It felt like that to me. The other thing that I've got from today too, I can understand the other side of it, where people are irate about it, thinking that, well, we're still really unhappy that it's not 6. We've still got the second one to come, which ultimately I think you get the result of that in April. It's still something that is very it's very particular for many people, that they can't get their heads around the fact that if they're only giving you 4 points back, therefore why can't they give us back the additional 6? What's going on with Forest as well? And I think this goes back to the thoughts I initially had with this, which I have had for quite some time, is the middle of a season when it happens. And this is something I spoke to Les to at length a few weeks ago, that how this takes away the integrity of the Premier League itself, because you look at all the clubs around us now, and they're sitting there thinking, well, we might have played a game in a different sort of way because we were in a certain position behind Everton. We needed to win a certain game against a particular side because we badly need to get in front of a club that gets us out. I'm thinking of Luton mainly. I bet you their manager would say, do you know what, we're looking at a fight against Everton to be the ones to stay in the Premier League in 17th place. That'll automatically change in regards to how they approach certain matches. I don't think that's right. Because you can't be doing that in the middle of a season. And again, I've referred to this as well. You look at the teams, the clubs that were trying to take all sorts of money from us, the likes of Leeds and Leicester, which that's still ongoing to the point where they're trying to take money back of us. If I was one of the fans of their clubs, I'd be absolutely be wanting that. I'd be supporting that for my club to do that, because given how long this has gone on for, in terms of the amount of years we've had to provide our books for to try and get around these issues, those clubs have got an argument to say, well, if you'd have done this last year, we were still in the Premier League. I think we would have finished below Leeds if we'd have got the deduction that we've got this season. They probably clearly feel they've got an issue with that. So I think that it's hard to get it round your head that this is a positive thing for us, aside from the fact that it keeps us in the Premier League. And I understand that many fans are taking that anger about all of this, but it does beg the question that how do we continue to go from this? And I'm talking about on the pitch. Yes, fine, today on its own, it's a success in inverted commas to get 4 points, get 5 points away from the relegation zone. But how do the club take the rest of the season now? How do we take this on? Is you see it against West Ham at home? Does that mean everybody's just digging it in a little bit more? It gives us a little bit more of a boost to play these games. It just seems so unfair to me around everybody that's in and around the Premier League. And look what else we could potentially have to fight for. That's that's the thing that doesn't sit right with me. And it's another indictment of how poor the Premier League have been.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. I think Matt Floss said actually that it's the only thing that'll change is that instead of protesting the 10th minute, now we'll protest in the 6th minute instead. But yeah, I'm sure there'll still be a presence and some flags and stuff up there, because it's all going to come on again. But I suppose that's the interesting thing now, isn't it, Patrick? That because Everton made it so clear that effectively the bones of this appeal are very similar to how they're going to fight the next charge. People are sort of throwing it ahead, and I've seen so many different opinions on whether this means that we're going to get another 6 point deduction, or it means that we're going to get nothing, or it means that we might get 2 or 3. And I think, again, from what I've seen from the small amount of the report I've read myself, what I've seen from you and Mick Greenall in particular on Twitter today, doesn't really seem to be any definite set precedent going forward in regards to what Everton might get. Yeah. But it's going to be interesting because obviously you've got that overlap, haven't you, of the 2 years onto this one, and potentially that's something that could be taken into account. But from what you've read, do you think you've been able to deduce anything about what might happen with the next appeal? Oh, sorry, with the next charge?
Well, the one precedent that has been set is that a points deduction is the only applicable punishment for an FFP breach. That's it. They make that clear. Now, the next group of KCs, the next commission may not decide to follow that precedent, but it would be very strange if they didn't, considering this is as I said on the podcast last week, this is the first Premier League case. Like, this becomes the precedent. Everything else was having to rely on EFL cases, or in this report, actually, they actually referred to a Dynamo Moscow case against UEFA, I think it is, again, to determine that the points deduction can be applied and should be applied. So there's 0.229 towards the end of the document, which is actually where I went to first. I think probably most people did. The KC explains, and by the way, just a word for this KC, he's called, I think it's Right Honourable Sir Gary Hickinbottom, who he makes a point. It's brilliant because there's among all like the legal jargon, he just makes this point about halfway through about how he just loved the arguments from both sets of lawyers, how he was so impressed with how he uses the term like strong, committed, powerful arguments with force, and he like goes
great set of
a
lads.
paragraph. Yeah, he spends a paragraph talking about how good the lawyers are. So fair play. Like, he seems a very old school, a lot more like case law in this. I feel like I'm back in my journalism legal exam, which as soon as I'd passed it straight past, I then ignored. But going back to it, there's 229 is where they essentially say, this commission says they disagree with both the original commission, and then they put in brackets a more experienced panel about accountancy in the field of football, but they also disagree with the Premier League board in the fact that it got to the 10, how they got to the 10-point sanction and everything like that. And it doesn't explain, which was what I was hoping. I was hoping it had explained the original commission's calculations, but I guess it's just looking at the evidence available and saying, well, we don't know how they came to it. We just don't agree with it. So what they have said in 229 is that they consider that 6-point deduction is the minimum but sufficient sanction required to achieve the aims of the PSR. It is reasonable and proportionate, and it's not out of kilter with any of the benchmarks to which Super Silk, I'm not going to try and say his last name, referred us, including other PL rules and the EFL scheme. So what essentially in one of the successful parts of Everton's appeal is they said there's some benchmarks that you need to follow. One of those benchmarks is the fact that you get 9 points going into administration, and straight away the appeal agreed. They said it's absolutely ridiculous that you get a harsh punishment for a PSR breach than going out of administration, which is worse for everyone. It's worse for other teams. It's worse for debtors. It's worse for players. Everybody like that. That is bad for the competition. So they agreed with that. Then they also, and that's where you might see knocking about. They said that the commission made some legal errors. So that is one of those that they applied there. And they just decide then, kind of not really out of thin air, they do justify it, but they say, we do believe the minimum should be 6 points. They also then, because of, like I said, that just point about the going into liquidation, they suggest that a PSR breach, points deduction wise, cannot be more than 9 points, because that's what you get for going into liquidation. So the precedent is the minimum is 6 points, the maximum is 9 or 8, depending if you want to match up. Like, so really, it's all then going to be about, can Everton argue it down? But, if Everton have breached, which they have, and Matt Flusco, having a conversation with Matt earlier on Twitter, we kind of both can't figure out how they have, because apparently, according to the lawyer in this, not lawyer, so according to the judge, for lack of a better term in this case, he said Everton only needed to break even in 21-22 financial year, but they didn't. They lost 10 million, and that meant that they were in the overspend. Now, the sums do add up in that sense. 59 million loss for 18-19 is dropping off in this one that we're in the docs for next month. So that means Everton will have had to lose 40 million last financial year to breached again. Now, I don't think any of us can think in terms of players how we've done that, but clearly they've either got close to it or they have done it because they're in again and they've admitted a breach. So in that sense, the precedent kind of is Everton get hit with another 6-point deduction. However, we've got the arguments of we've already been punished. We've got this positive trend, which they go on about for quite a length in this report, saying a positive trend has to be taken into account as a mitigating factor. They are trying, they are actively trying, they are actively showing it. And I actually think we can show it better for 22-23 than we could do before as well. Like we made a lot of strides.
Sorry to interrupt you there, mate. Would we be able
Yeah.
to show that though if we have breached? And I know you said you don't know how or
Yeah,
why we have.
there's a bit there's a bit again in the report where it says that Everton, which there's kind of new things have come out of this report, and one of them is that in October in the hearing then Everton tried to put in the financial year 22-23 accounts kind of as an estimate, as another example of us working towards a positive trend. And the actual term they use is upturn. Now, the original commission, and I think fairly so, said you can't do that because it's not about that time. Like you can't go into the future and say, well, we're doing this now. Like we've got to have a cut off. And the appeal agreed again and didn't try to change that. And Everton didn't try to argue that. But it does show that clearly there is. I can't imagine Everton would have been bothered about putting it in the first place if it showed that they were still doing things badly. So it's whether it's been enough. Now, as we're in the doc again, it suggests it hasn't been, but maybe the positive trend, and they do refer to it, this upturn that is there, maybe that will be enough again as a mitigating factor to knock that deduction down. So if the next case uses this as precedent, my mind that means 6 points. But you kind of then you're arguing down from 6 points. You know you can't get more because there's no real basis to go on more. You've not aggravated. Again, the report goes to like it does say we misled, but we didn't purposely mislead. So it agrees with the original commission there. There's no like it actually sorry for rambling on, but actually disagrees with the original commission on the being less than frank, element, and that's kind of it seems why they gave us some points back for that. They're saying that the commission originally had no place to judge if Everton were lying or not. That's not what they were. They weren't there to judge any dishonesty. They were just there to look at the facts. And they're quite damning, really. And they say that commission should not have done that. They should never have strayed into, did they do this? Did they do that? They should have just gone with, these are the facts at hand. So that works in Everton's favour. The fact that we are positively, hopefully trending in the right direction. So even if they have lost that money, is it on the stadium? Is it on the fact that we lost revenue from finishing lower in the league, and then we lost the USM Finch Farm sponsorship, which should maybe play into that one. Like we've got a reasonable thing there to say. So I think we're on stronger grounds to defend this case. But I wouldn't be surprised just based on that if there is another points deduction to come. But I would be shocked if it's anything more than a couple, just because we've got genuinely strong mitigating factors. And then for Forest, on the other hand, I think for them you're looking at that 6 to 8 point mark if the precedent is followed.
No, when you say,
sorry,
I was just going to say, when you're referring to the additional points that could come back to that, you've said about the next one could essentially be around 6 points.
That's just based on, so that again, it's what they say, that we consider that a 6 point deduction is the minimum but sufficient sanction required. Now, it doesn't specifically say that it's about this case in particular, but you've got to kind of take it at face value that it's in this report talking about the case all the time. It's about this one, but the precedent's been set there. Like that's the thing. They used the Sheffield Wednesday one before to decide that a sporting sanction was the thing. Now this case has said, right, if you breach PSR in the Premier League, you've got to get a points deduction. So I think it'd be a very brave KC to then go and totally disregard that in the next appeal, in the next hearing for both Forest and Everton, because you're going against the most recent and relevant case law. And from my basic understanding, that's just not what should happen. And the lawyers, for the Premier League will argue that. They'll say, well, you've got the example here. We don't need to talk about EFL cases because we've got one right here. And it's essentially tells you what you need to do. So, or using that, if Everton have breached again, then you're thinking, right, that's an automatic another 6 points. But we've got the mitigation of already been punished. 2 of the years fall in the same thing. The positive trend, the again the defense that they mentioned about not being less than frank, we've been open and honest to an extent. They say that we did provide misleading information. They just don't think we did it purposefully, or they're not going to deduct us points for doing it purposefully. Essentially, they are saying it's an aggregating factor, but we're not gonna say that you definitely did it, because it's, how do you prove it? How do you prove that they actually meant to be crafty? You can't. Like, they could have just, the argument is, oh, we got it wrong, and the Premier League are saying no, they lied to us. Like, you can't really judge either way. So that's my fear, would be that the maximum punishment would be another 6 points, or they decide that it's because we've done it again that they're going to do us for 6 points because you've done it again. But really, it seems that the general school of thought is that should work in our favour, that we've already been punished, good behaviour, everything like that, and we have got this positive trend that we seem to have evidence of showing.
No, that's really interesting, and like,
Yeah.
I think as well, like what you said there in regards to this is effectively case one. Like, it sort of feels like if they're looking at this going forward, and like, I know precedents are being set, and it says case law, but it feels like a lot of this is quite fluid as well, maybe going
Yeah.
forward, because there is, and like, Everton are obviously the first team to get done for a points deduction for this. They got 10 points. That's been changed to 6 points now. That feels like that 6 to 9 mark, like you mentioned, there will be a precedent set. But the next thing that's going to be for the first time, I suppose, is the team getting done twice in 2 years, or for the same time period over 2 years. And like, that's where it feels like maybe, like, try and look at this positively, and while we might not be hit with 6 points deduction again, maybe they'll look at that and go, well, actually, this and this and this, and this is a factor, and this is a factor, and this is a factor. Maybe another 6 points isn't the right way to go about it if you're breaching consecutive years. Like, it
Yeah,
feels like,
maybe
sorry, go
that
on.
one will go like, you need a transfer ban instead. We're not going to give you with a point deduction, but you've already kind of had your points deduction. We'll give you another one. The only thing that stopped me thinking that is there is actually a mention of a transfer ban that this appeals board didn't think it would be suitable. But again, is that just for this case? I think actually that's probably a good thing for Everton. I don't think they could have afforded a transfer ban this summer. Not with the players we've got on loan and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, again, like you said, it's all fluid. Like, a different lawyer on a different day could have decided something totally different. And it's annoying that in both of these reports, both of the lawyers say it would be nice if there was a guidelines policy. Like, we'd like that. But the Premier League rules are that you give us full responsibility, and the Premier League rules are voted on by the clubs. And whether 5 clubs disagreed, but 15 went with the not having a policy, or whether it was all 20, the Premier League clubs decide to do that at the end of the day. What is interesting is that, and this is new information, that the squad cost rule that got talked about a few weeks ago, and how the Premier and Richard Masters said in his DCMS committee hearing that it is specifically mentioned in here that the appeals say they are told by the Premier League and Everton that the proposal for that squad cost rule comes with a maximum punishment of a 9-point deduction. So it's like, in the next ones, they're kind of thinking, right, we're going to have these rules, and we've recognised that we need some form of worst case scenario punishment.
I suppose the other thing as well, like you mentioned Forest there, and Dave, and I know, like, when we were against the Premier League, we were sort of rallying everyone outside the big six, in inverted commas, to be together. But if we're looking at this cynically and ruthlessly, and from an Everton staying up perspective, we're above them in the league as it stands now. It feels like if they're both going to get punished going forward for the charges, for all the reasons that the Patric outlined there, for the little amount of Forest breach, they're probably going to get more than us, you'd say, if they're both going to get with points deductions. Like, it feels like they'll be in that 6 to 8 bracket. The Patric mentioned we might be 6, but it doesn't feel like, well, surely won't be any more than that, given what we know about Everton's situation going forward. And like, that's going to put them at a disadvantage to us as well, which can only help us in our chances of staying in the top flight.
Yeah, again, it refers back to what I said. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's what makes this so silly, really. It makes a professional sport. I know there's all sorts of different Premier League issues we could argue all night about that have made the Premier League look ridiculous for many, many years. And, the other things you could bang on talking about is Man City's breach and all of that different stuff that's gone on there. I'm sure, Patrick, you'd be in a book all night long, mate. If you needed to get into what's going on with all that stuff, you'd be reading for days about what's going on with Man City compared to the likes of ourselves. But how sad is it, though, lads, that putting it in perspective, we're sitting there hoping that Nottingham Forest get a similar points deduction as ourselves because it helps us staying in the Premier League. How's that anything to do with the ethics of the game itself? And I know, look, the financial side of it and all that's been in the game since it became the Premier League in the early 90s. And it's shadowed the best of why we like the game ourselves, not speaking, and Patrick, you look about 12, mate, but you think back to that, like remembering that. I was only a kid remembering that when the Premier League came in, and that's when the big money came in. Since then, it's felt like that's much more important than the football itself. And I think this just epitomises that we're sitting here speaking about, well, let's hope Forest get lower than us rather than having to go there and get 3 points, rather than having a 6-point game.
I think
does that not make you feel quite disheartened about the actual game itself?
I think it makes me feel hollow. But I think trying to look at this positively, and I think now what's happened with us and what's happened with Forest, and the fact that there is some case law, some precedent to go with these rules. I think now the teams will take them a lot more seriously, and I think our 2 cases, the case of Forest, maybe might have another couple, further down the line. Certainly, if you look at Chelsea and the way they've been going about it, they're going to have to sell a lot of players, I think, to be able to stay afloat in the coming years. But I feel like teams will take it seriously now, and they will make sure they'll get people in to make sure that they are within these rules, and they'll stick to them. And I just think we'll have us, Forest, maybe a couple more cases going forward, and then you'd like to think that hopefully everyone just sticks to these rules now, because there is something there that says this is what you can't do and this is what you will be punished if you breach it. Whereas obviously with us, it was a bit more vague.
Always the first, aren't we?
Yeah, stick it on the Goodison time on that side. But I think we've already seen that a bit, haven't we, Patrick? Look at January and the lack of spending, and teams just being terrified of this, and Dave's right. It's you don't want to be sat here going, well, we might get 4 different points totals potentially between now and the end of the season based on outcomes, and Forest might do, and that's going to impact Luton, and it's shit for now. But hopefully going forward, teams will just stick to these rules, and we won't have to deal with it.
It is really frustrating. I think what they need to strike is probably a balance between, the fact that there was 800 or 750 million spent this January less than the January before. I mean, that tells its own story. And, Moise Caicedo's been getting a bit of stick for his performances as of late for Chelsea. And some journalists saying, oh, well, he should have gone to Liverpool. Look how much better off he'd have been. Neither of those clubs should have been bidding 100 million for him. That's the problem. That is the issue right there. It's the fact that. And what annoyed me again about the Premier League in January with Richard Masters saying, look at Brighton, look at Brentford, they're the models to follow. It's like those models only work because clubs like Chelsea have loads of money that can go and buy those players. Without that, the model doesn't work. So there's got to be a balance between clubs probably not being, I think, don't do it through fear necessary, but do it from the fact that you should have financial regulation in some form. Now, to me, we could go on all night about that. For me, a salary cap would be a good idea. I think you could implement that fairly across the board, and maybe it's a short-term pain for long-term gain. But I suppose the squad cost rule, they'll say it's a small step towards that if it comes in. And yeah, it does suggest they've got now, if that does come in, they've got a set punishment, at least a maximum punishment. Whereas it was totally up to the commission with this. I think I heard you speak about it before, Matt. They could have kicked us out of the league. That they could have done that. That was well within their powers. They could have done anything. They decided to give us a 10-point deduction. This appeals decided that's got exactly the same powers as decided will knock that down to 6. So what the issue is, it's kind of like you've got turkeys voting for Christmas. Why would clubs vote for a set sanctioning guideline? And they probably maybe would rather take their chance on case law, because on case law, it still all depends on interpretation and how good a lawyer's argument is and how persuasive they are. It's all about that. So the clubs will maybe be thinking, let's not have those set guidelines. Let's just take our chances on going and get a good lawyer. And that's another thing that could come about. The original commission said it was real. It said it was it kind of hinted that it was reluctant to set a precedent. And that almost felt that to set a precedent, they just went to the highest punishment they could think of in a case of like, well, it's only going to come down on appeal, and maybe basically it felt like they put it on someone else to set the precedent, and this is what these people have done. And maybe now, maybe we'll know that okay, a minimum breach is 6 points, and you know that if you do your PSI, you're gonna get 6 points. But the issue is that if you go over by £1, are you getting 6 points? And then if you go over by 50 million, are you getting 6 points? Like, where's the fairness in that? So I think maybe that's why it won't work exactly in practice. But I think at least in theory, for these cases coming up in the next few weeks, at least there's something very, very recent to go off. And it would seem mad if they then decided to just go and base it on something else, wouldn't they? But I did think it worth on one of the points that we won. Our lawyer did use a paper that is written by the lawyer who is representing Nottingham Forest against the Premier League, and of course, a few months ago was representing all those clubs against us. So it's also incestuous. It's also like just goes around in circles. And then one other thing, which again on one of the points we lost, which I actually think from the reading, the KC almost wanted to give it us, and it was about the mitigation for Ukraine, the Russian sanctions. And it was the one surrounding the naming rights, and it comes to pass that the board had board meeting minutes, which the Premier League obviously didn't for their meeting. But anyway, Everton board had meeting minutes between the club's board and the stadium company, which I know is the same people, but in January 22, which all the legal paperwork had been completed for that naming rights deal, everything was done. It just needed Mashiri to sign it. And he didn't sign it, and then Russia invaded Ukraine. And Mashiri was claiming that we'd have had this deal. It's like, no, we'd have had this deal if you'd have got off your yacht and signed the paper. Like, it's like we've had all along with him, isn't he? Not signing off on transfer deals, nobody knowing the left hand, not knowing what the right hand's doing. It's like we were so close to probably being able to account for losing 10 million a season. And that could have made we were fine. But our daft owner didn't sign it. So what can you do? Like, it is awful. And it says at the end of the report, that we take upon the opinion of the FAB, take on all that on board as much as they can, because they said we can't give Everton fans a voice in this without then giving other clubs fans a voice in it. That wouldn't be fair. But what we can do is take into account their like submission essentially. And it makes the point of saying the really reading through between the lines, like, we know we're punishing the fans, but it's the club's fault. And the fans have every right to feel frustrated with all parties involved. And it kind of gives the Premier League a slap on the wrist. I think Nick Hunter's done a piece in the Guardian saying no one comes out of it well, and they don't. And the teams that's lost out really are probably thinking like right now it's Luton and Forest. So yeah, just try and make the most of it now, and fingers crossed. We've got a good defense for the second appeal and second case, and maybe it does come to nothing, or it comes to just a few points.
Yeah, Mashiri not signing it. It's like it's probably that situation, like when your pen runs out in the house and you can't find another one. Do you reckon that's what happened to him? It's like,
it literally
got no ink in this.
This indicate that legal paperwork had been done in the naming agreement, which it seems needed to be signed before third-party senior debt was obtained, and they were waiting for Mr. Mashiri's instruction. And then a month later, Russia invade Ukraine. So, the appeal essentially decide that, well, the original commission said that because these documents hadn't been signed, it can't accept them as evidence. Like, they're not done, are they? It's just an intention to do it.
They're probably like still on his shelf at home, are they, or something, just gathering dust. Just
like... Yeah,
probably in his memoirs.
They're like next to his picture of James McCarthy.
Brilliant. Do you know the other thing that gets me now is the fact that we've got the 4 points back. You start thinking about, like, still I keep in my mind this is on the side of the football itself. Just get out of it. Just get out of it as much as you can. Get enough points so even if you receive what they can possibly give us, that it will not matter anyway. And I know that's very much, it's easier said than done given the run of form that we've had and things like that. But what you've mentioned there, Patrick, is like, I think it moves away from people's initial idea that this is the club's fault ultimately. And again, all people have spoken about, or 99% of people have spoken about, which I've been getting slated for doing the other 1%, is, this is really unfair, which it is, and we've spoken about it. You've just spoken about it so eloquently then. But I think, well, How do Everton stop doing this? I think you just highlight with what you said there about Machiri not being able to sign it, but how naive has that club actually been, and do we still have a concern that the same people are there effectively to be the ones that guide us in the future? That's still a massive concern for me.
Well,
Yeah,
nobody's really there now, are they? At the
yeah, no
moment.
one's
Well,
there.
what I mean is, it's like you said there. If the president said it's like you don't go and do that again, do you trust Everton not to go and do that again? I certainly don't. The way Everton are as a club, you
I
know.
mean, I think the
Go on, mate.
footballing side, I do. I do, I've been critical of Kevin Felwell, and I think fairly so at times, but I actually think he'll do a much better job of defending Everton's transfer dealings than we did in the first case, where I said it again last week. We had, I'm not meaning it in a disrespectful way, the Premier League had a top class forensic accountant up against the lecturers from the University of Liverpool and Dan Purdy. And like, what was going to happen there? Like, the Premier League claimed that Everton sold most of their players to the Premier League before and during COVID, which is like demonstrably provable as wrong. But our expert witness agreed. And it's like, no, like you can prove that this didn't happen. Like we sold two players to the Premier League, Richarlison and Luka Dean. They just happened to make up a big sum of money. Like we sold a lot of other players to Europe, and that market took a significant hit during COVID. Like that's provable, but we didn't do a good job. I think now the club will have hopefully learned. They've learned again to go and get a top class commercial lawyer straight off the bat, rather than maybe relying on Sports One for these cases. And I know that sounds bad. It sounds like an admission of guilt, but you get the best, you get the better results. And then I do think that because of they do mention it, how important the trend is, and they do give us credit for it. And I think that Cathelwell will probably be able to say, look at all the work we did last year to do this. We sold a player, whether through design or not. We did sell a player in January for 45 million pure profit for the Bucks, or 40 million, whatever it was, and didn't get anybody in. Now, where that 40 million went, who knows? Because, Usmanov's net worth apparently went up 50 million the next week. So who knows? But it came into the club at least first on the books. And we sold Moise Keane. We pushed through that deal early to Juventus. I think Paddy wrote in The Athletic, like, made efforts to do this, made efforts to get Ellis Sims out and Issy Samuel Smith. I don't think the deals were done in June, but the paperwork was started. They're going to try and use that, apparently. Like, I think on that side, the whole point, hasn't it? And it's what's wound Everton fans up, opposition fans going, "Oh, you just spent it on players and wages." It's like, no, we didn't. We did in the early days, absolutely, but we really tried to correct that for about 2 years, and the results are on the pitch. So I'm hoping that they can show that at least with the player trading side, and that can hopefully be hopefully in the next report, even if we are hit with a 2 or 3 point deduction, it will just be a case of we know that Everton weren't being reckless spending on players anymore, and it's just the fact that because of the rules, they kind of can't get out of this cycle quickly enough. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? But all we can do now is like go and win some matches, like we've done it
Yeah.
before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like,
Just go
yeah,
and score some goals, win some games, and you know,
Give it what you want
if we,
then.
I know it sounds awful, but if we stay above Forest, then we're probably going to be all right.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just got to help the manager and the players as well. Like, just to have one little morsel of certainty to cling on to in what has been just an avalanche of just, you know, uncertainty, effectively, isn't it? Like, no one knows who owns us. No one knows how many points we're gonna get. It's absolutely insane what's been going on over the last few weeks. And I know, like, we're nowhere near getting it solved, but like this little tiny bit which has been lingering most prominently for the last few weeks is finally like sorted. Like, we know that this is a bit boxed off now.
Yeah.
So hopefully they just
I
sort
do,
of
I do think
focus.
it's two things worth noting as well. Sorry, that it does make mention in the report that at the end of the hearing, it's in that bit where he's talking about how he loves all the lawyers. The end of the hearing, they said we'll make a decision by the end of February. That's what they said to the lawyers, to the clubs, to the Premier League, and that was always agreed on. And then it said that a copy of this report was actually provided to both parties' solicitors on Monday the 19th, so the day of the Palace game last week.
Mm,
But it was under confidentiality, so they obviously couldn't have done it. It was literally just to check it off for any type. And they said it made a few amendments, and then it was subsequently up to all the parties to agree when the publication of the report was. So the Premier League and Everton both agreed that it should be published today. So I know that there's been some talk that the club like received word or anything like that. Well, just today, like maybe obviously the people at the club did in terms of who work at Finch Farm every day, but at least in terms of their representatives and the very people at the top, they will have known this were coming now for like the last few days. They agreed to put it out today. That's what the report says.
Fascinating stuff. More of this fun and games to come. I'm sure. Just bit of positivity. Saturday, by the way, could be amazing for everyone going to the match because we've got West Ham at home.
Yeah.
Painting a scenario for you here, Dave. We're going to have a lovely time on Saturday. We've got West Ham at home. Everton win that football match. We all get back to the boozer, do our post-match podcast. And the late game that night is, do you know?
The late game in that?
The late game that night is Luton Aston Villa.
Aston Villa, yeah. I mean, that could be the stay we've had all for a few years. That couldn't it?
Great scenario. Everton win, get back to the boozer, record the podcast.
Yeah.
Ollie Watkins smashing a few goals while we all have a lovely time that evening, and we pull even further clear of the relegation.
Yeah, and you know what? There's an irony tonight because we want our old mate David Moyes to go and do us a deal against Brentford, don't we, as well?
Yeah, those West Ham fans don't know how lucky they are.
It's going all over. Yeah, they want him sacked, don't they? Apparently, it's all going off all over the place, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, like you say, there with the games that are coming in, it does make me wonder. And it's for a different podcast altogether. But we've spoken quite extensively about the mood and mentality of the players when they see all of this shit going on. Do you think that deduction today they're all walking into, because Dice mentioned it himself, they need the sooner the better?
Can't hurt, can it? It can't hurt. That's all I'll say. Like,
yeah. That's the thing. Everything Patrick said there so accurately, and what he's told us there, it does make me think that he's still going there blindfolded though. But like you said, I think ultimately he should be walking in there saying, right, lads, look at the league table now. The job is get as high up as we possibly can. And then if this comes at us again, we don't give a shit. We can all go on holiday and start with a clean slate in the summer.
I think we could be 12, couldn't we, on Saturday? The results go for us.
I mean, Europa Leagues. Then what happens if you qualify for the Europa League?
Ah, Dave, bless you. Talking about Europa League.
I'm not to go into too much details. I do think they randomly mentioned that. Like they mentioned that why one of their reasonings for giving a point deduction is like, what if a team qualified for the Europa League? It's like, Jesus Christ, we don't have to worry about that. Like, bloody hell, like, you can't go that far.
This is where it all turns around now. But listen.
The points back to qualify for the top four then.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, we can still technically win the league, can't we? I read the other day. So, we'll see. But yeah, we'll wrap it up there anyway. Cheers to Dave. Cheers, Patrick. Absolutely superb as ever on all stuff off the pitch. And let us know your thoughts. If you watch us on YouTube, leave a comment, click like, click subscribe. It all helps. And if you're listening on the podcast, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. That also helps. And the more you do it, the less I'll have to say it at the end of these shows. So appreciate everyone for listening. Have a good week. We'll speak to you soon. Up the Toffees.